Extreme Speed is a budget style racer that was released for the PlayStation 2 back in 2004, and this game was developed by the same developers that created other budget type of racers around the same time on the PlayStation 1 with the likes of 5-Star Racing and All-Star Action and All-Star Racing series on the PS1. So this game takes a lot of elements from those PS1 style games and adds them here on the PS2 with updated graphics and visuals. It takes a lot of the visual cues and elements from those PS1 style games and adds them in here, but definitely just takes things up to a different level and utilises the graphical power of the PS2. Although the visual style from playing it is very reflective of those PS1 games. If you've ever played any of those All-Star Action games on the PS1, you will see the visual style is very similar. Only difference is the graphics capabilities of the PS2 is much better, but it still looks and feels very like the same type of game. The one thing to note with this game compared to any of its PS1 counterparts is the addition of different modes that allows you to play and race in different tournaments where you can unlock additional features as you go through the course of play, where you actually do have to win races to go through a point system to win tournaments outright. Whereas with the PS1 versions of games, they played more like demos, more so than actual games, as you got involved in quick race events, but there was no outright tournaments where you could play to achieve status on leaderboards as such, whereas this game allows you to do that. But it does give you access to some quite iconic and excellent classic cars, anything from the likes of the Renault Alpine A110 to other classic cars from the likes of Triumph, MG, Mercedes, even to replicas of the likes of the Mitsubishi Lancer Evo 5 rally car that you can use also on the tracks. So it does have enough unique elements and vehicles that cater for different tastes. Now, it's not the best racer to be developed on the system, but if you do like a good mix of arcade with different qualities, just remember that this is a budget title and it is very different from the likes of games such as Gran Turismo and other iconic racers on the system. This is just but a multitude of budget style development titles that were released for the PlayStation 2 during its lifespan. The funny thing to note is that with the mountain of games that were released for the PS2, there was a ton of them that were released on lower budgets or with different types of quality, and this game is very reflective of that. Now, it's definitely not the best racer on the system, but does offer some unique quirks and does appeal to a various type of audience, especially if you do like racing different types of cars. It would be worth a look at, but for most people out there that want more authentic experiences, it's one of those games that you probably should avoid and look elsewhere. Motorbike King is a very unique budget-styled arcade racer that was released for the PlayStation back in 2004, and the game also got a subsequent release in 2003 in Japan under the simple 2000 budget series of games. And this is a very obscure but yet also very unique style of racing game where you play as customized motorcycles, where you have to race in one-to-one kind of like competitive events where you do have an opponent on the track, and the goal is to win the race while avoiding obstacles and also trying to accumulate points by completing various stunts throughout different phases of each of the races. The one thing to note is the graphical style, as it's very different from a lot of other race types on the console, but the graphical quality really suits the aesthetic and the style the game is going for, and it definitely has enough unique appeal that will cater to a lot of different game styles and even players alike. But aside from the positives, it isn't all plain sailing, as there are quite a few gripes with the game in terms of the handling physics of the bikes themselves and the computer AI, as the handling of the bikes can be extremely sensitive to a point that you can lose control very easily and smash into walls. But where the real frustration lies is with the computer generated AI opponents that you race against, in that at times you can win races, but it's so obscure in how the placements act when you play, because in some cases you can win a race very easily, but then in other cases, if you make a single mistake, the computer AI gets really aggressive and can literally take on a life of its own, to a point that it can get so far ahead of you that you will never catch the opponent for the rest of the race, and it's pretty much game over. So it will take quite a few attempts and through trial and error, even frustration, in order to win races and to continue further on throughout the tournaments in the game. Now, it may not appeal to every player out there, but it definitely has enough unique appeal and character that will cater to many. So it is worthwhile checking out if you like the quirky nature of the game, but like I said, it isn't for everybody. So if this is the type of game that you would enjoy, you would be best to look elsewhere. Hercules is a quirky but yet obscure arcade kart racing game that allows you to play as various characters from different folklore and even types of gods. It allows you to play as different godlike characters, primarily even with Zeus, among other characters. This game was also developed by the same developers that created the PS2 Kart Racer series, and you'll notice straight away with this game, apart from a few certain features, this game is pretty much a reskinned version of PS2 Kart Racer, mainly even down to the tracks and even the game mechanics, as a lot of the tracks in the game are almost identical to some degree. There's just certain elements that have been changed out in terms of certain textures and even some of the environmental objects, but technically it's the same game. The only main difference is that you're driving around in chariots instead of like carts, and the chariots are a lot wider on the track, so they can hamper your progress depending on where you're at in terms of the track layouts, as they're a lot wider, so they're definitely harder to navigate around certain terrain. But if you like kart racing games that have very fun and unique graphics and even cartoony style graphics, this is another one of those games that you can check out. It is a budget racer after all, so it's not without its flaws, but if you want to try out something a little bit different, there's no harm in having a look at this game to see what you think for yourself. Moto X Maniac is a very obscure budget racing game that was released for the PS2, and this focuses on more motocross styled elements where you race on different types of off-road terrain and tracks using the likes of modified motorbikes or scramblers. Now, as this is a budget game, it is very reflective of the visual style and the gameplay elements. Very little information is known about this game online, other than the fact is that from what has been seen, it didn't get the best of reviews, as the gameplay was slated due to the gameplay style control elements, as it is a very difficult game to master. You slide off the tracks and crash into different elements all the time, but there's just a lot of buggy features in the game that really dilutes the experience of the game itself. And the PlayStation 2 is home to a number of various types of off-road and motocross style titles, but unfortunately this doesn't stack up amongst the best that the system has to offer, and for that reason alone it is also considered to be one of the worst racing games on the PlayStation 2, as a lot of the times it's just so hard to master the controls and even to win a race. The chances of winning a race in this game are almost impossible, as the frustrating AI and the difficult control settings and elements just lead for an overall frustrating experience that's probably best avoided. Mini Desktop Racing is a unique budget top-down style racer that at first glance is heavily inspired by the iconic Micro Machines games, especially even Micro Machines V3 that would have been on the PlayStation 1. And it has some unique elements and it has some decent graphics, but unlike the Micro Machines games, it's not as well polished or well put together. It has some quite unique environments, although you are limited to the environment types in the game, as you're only racing around the likes of office spaces, and that's primarily all that's on offer. But where the game really falls down is the mechanics, as although the graphics are decent in the game, the controls and the collision detection in the game is not good, and it leaves for a very frustrating experience, because the handling is so twitchy and so unforgiving that more often than not most gamers will just turn the game off in frustration and go on to play something else, because coupled with that and the aggressive computer AI, they're usually way ahead of you, that you will spend the entirety of the race trying to catch up with them, and more often than not you will always end up in last place no matter how good you race on each course. So it's a very frustrating experience, and it's a pity because it promises a lot but yet fails to deliver on pretty much every area in the game. So if you're looking for a cartoony styled toy car racer, there are better games on the system, so this one you probably should avoid and go and look elsewhere. So you probably should avoid this in favour of some better games on the system. International Super Karts is more of a realistic take on the kart racing genre that allows you to drive around in actual customised go-karts that you can race along different types of tracks and environments, anything from industrial estates to like forest type tracks or even proper kart racing tracks. And the gameplay is fast and fun for what's on offer, but it feels more like a simulation game, so there is a learning curve involved, and especially with the likes of the controls. As with a lot of kart racers, they're not the simplest games to pick up and play, as the handling is always very twitchy, and the slightest little move or even knock at any sort of speed will literally spin the kart out, which means that you'll have to try and spend the entirety of the race to try and regain your places, which in this game is very hard to do. Although it is one of the more realistic looking kart racing games that is on the system, it's definitely not without its flaws, as it can be difficult to master. But once you put a bit of time into it, you can get used to the controls and the physics of the karts themselves, and eventually when you're going through the various championship modes that are on offer, you will be able to maintain your positions throughout the championships, and you will eventually start to win races. But you just have to know how to get used to the feel of each of the karts and just to learn the layout of the tracks, which will take a lot of practice. And if you are into kart racing games, this is another one of those games that might be worth looking into. Living World Racing is a very colourful yet very obscure racing game that allows you to race in a fictional, almost fantasy type of setting where the characters are animals and you can race on fantasy vehicles with the likes of boats that use like clouds to allow the boats to hover over the ground. Now the game does have some really nice graphics that are very cartoony and very colourful, but ideally that's the best prospect about the game, as it is heavily let down by the controls of the vehicles themselves, as although it is playable, but the game can be quite slow and clunky, and if you make any contact with any walls or parts of the environment or even with other racers on the track, it can completely throw you off and completely just make you lose track of where you are on the course at any given time. And it means then that you have to constantly try to play catch up with the computer AI, only for them to knock you off the track again, which can lead for a very frustrating experience. It is one of those type of racing games that does look really nice, but it just doesn't play as well as it looks, and for that reason alone it is one of those games that you probably should avoid and look elsewhere, as there are better budget style racers on the system. Noble Racing is another unique budget style racer that was published by Midas Interactive for the PlayStation back in 2008, and this game offers up access to a number of different cars in the Noble franchise, with the game offering access to 12 different staged tracks and various events, anything from challenges to club events, practice modes, time trials and different car challenges that allows you to unlock additional features and vehicles throughout play. The one thing to note with this game is, even though it is a budget style title, it does use a licensed variation of the Noble franchise, even down to the cars and the models in question. But the game was developed with a lower budget compared to more mainstream games. Like if you compare it to the likes of Gran Turismo 3 and 4, the comparisons are almost uncomparable in terms of its development quality, as this game isn't as well put together compared to the likes of those iconic games. As yes, it is playable and does have some nice graphics, but where the game really falls down is due to its handling physics, as the gameplay can be very sluggish and very sensitive, where you will spend more time sliding off the track. You will feel like you're actually on a skating rink with the cars, as there's no grip on the roads, and when you unlock more cars throughout your playthrough, the faster the car is, the more harder it is and more difficult it is to handle. So you will spend more time digging yourself out of barriers and crashing into everything that comes your way, as once you gain up any sort of level of speed, you'll never really be able to keep the car on the track long enough for it to really matter, and it just leads to the overall frustration of the experience itself, as it does offer up some really cool and unique elements elements, but fails to deliver in terms of the handling, as that is the major issue with the game. And that can be a deal breaker for a lot of gamers, as it can be just extremely frustrating to play and very difficult to win races as a result, because not only do you have to deal with the dodgy controls, you also have to deal with very aggressive and difficult computer AI that the second you make a mistake, and you will in this game, the race is already over. You will never catch any of the opponents that are ahead of you. They'll be so far gone that even when you do start off a race in general, they're so far ahead of you that you can never really overtake them, and once you even tip them or touch them at all throughout the course of play, you will skid off into the nearest barrier, and that's it, pretty much game over. So it is one of those games, it's not for everybody. If you do like the Noble franchise and you want to see a lot of what the cars are on offer, it is worth a look for that respect alone. But if you are looking for a more mainstream racer and something to really get your teeth into, this isn't that game, and you would be probably best to look elsewhere, as there are better racers on the PS2. Rig Racer 2 was released for the PlayStation in 2005, and this game got a future release on the Nintendo Wii in 2007, and it is a budget styled racing game that allows you to race as trucks or lorries in a track style environment, and the goal is to compete in racing tournaments in different tiers to unlock additional features and to unlock additional trucks, new paint styles, all from winning races and competing. Now, as it is a budget game, it doesn't come without its flaws, as visually the graphics themselves are decent enough for what is on offer, but where the game really lacks is in its control elements, as the game can be very frustrating and very fiddly to get to grips with. That can really frustrate a lot of players. The game itself didn't get great reviews at all in the magazine, and the same can be said with the Nintendo Wii version of the game, as it also got very low to average reviews at best, and it was criticised heavily due to its gameplay style and the sensitivity of the controls, as you would slide around everywhere and you'd never really feel like you have full control over the vehicle at any given time, and it can cause you to lose races and just get stuck against walls, and it means that you have to constantly restart the races in order to try and gain any sort of a good playthrough. So it's just another one of those budget racers that does offer up some unique elements, but sadly fails to deliver on most of what is available, and for that reason alone, there are better games on the system. There's even better budget styled entries on the system, so you may be better to look elsewhere. Knight Rider the game was released for the PlayStation 2 back in the year of 2002, and this game is inspired by the iconic TV series from the 1980s and tries to continue on with the aesthetics of the storyline from the iconic series, where you play as Michael Knight and then Kit the talking cow. The game offers up its own story arc and offers up a different variety of missions where you have to complete different tasks in order to complete and unlock additional features and unlockables as you go through the course of play. You also, among those objectives, will have to compete in races, and you also will have to avoid various different obstacles. But as with the TV series, Kit comes well equipped with a number of different features and elements to help you to overcome those hurdles, but to utilise them to maximum effect will take a bit of time to get used to the control features in the game, as even though this is a game that is based off an iconic TV franchise, it is not developed by a mainstream company, as this is more of a budget style of title, so it's more apparent and can be seen in terms of the gameplay. Now, it's not to say that the game is bad, but it definitely could have been a lot better and does have limitations in terms of a lot of the features that are involved in the game, as it does miss a lot of key elements in terms of the handling physics, as the handling itself, although it is playable, could have been a lot better, and some of the initial elements, especially at the start of the game when you have to complete different objectives and try to learn Kit's various features, can lead to an awful lot of frustration and lead players to quit, as it can be very awkward and just downright infuriating to try and figure out how to utilise some of the different combinations to complete various tasks. So if you are a fan of the Knight Rider series, it is worth having a look at just to experience a new story arc of the franchise. But for those that want an authentic racer, there are better games on the system, so you would probably be best to look elsewhere. So here we have taken a look at yet another list of unique budget style racers that were released for the PlayStation 2, and hopefully you'll be able to see the plethora of these type of games that were released on the system back in the day, as there was a ton of them, all based around different genres, anything from motorbike racing to Mario Kart style racers to desktop style racing with the likes of even Micro Machines and kart racing games, among other style of games on the system. The PS2 really did have an abundance of games on offer that suited so many different needs and wants. Although not all of them were great, but they all had a unique presence and offered something that was different from each other. While many of these games may not appeal to many gamers, they do have a unique aesthetic that you really won't see anywhere else. And hopefully by watching these videos that it will encourage players to at least revisit these games or to experience them for the first time, so that they can share their own opinions of whether they like them or not. And I would love to know your thoughts behind the games in this list. Have you played them yourself, and if so, what do you think of them? Did you enjoy any of the games here, or maybe not so much? I'd love to hear what opinions you have of these racing games, if you've even yet to experience them or if you have played them at all. So be sure to share it down in the comments below, and make sure to keep watching, as there is going to be a lot more videos from this series being in the works soon, as the PlayStation 2 has an absolute ton of budget style racers. So I've yet to go through even more of them, and the more games I get to play, the more I'm finding games for the first time that I never heard of, so I'm getting to share that with you all. So if you are interested in seeing more of these budget style racers, again, make sure to keep watching, and in the meantime, subscribe to the channel and leave a like on the video, and again, hit that bell icon to be updated when future videos in this series will be released. And if you are interested in seeing other budget racers that were also released on the PS2, then be sure to check out the playlist here on screen to see more of those games in action. So be sure to check them out, and I will see you all over the next one.